people boarded ships to a country that didn't exist. Most of them died there. This wasn't a navigation error. It was a calculated fraud that raised £200,000 in government bonds worth roughly £24 million today for a nation with a flag, a constitution, printed currency, and a detailed guidebook. The man behind it walked free, rich, respected. And he did it again. London, 1821. The city was hungry, not for food, but for opportunity. The Napoleonic Wars had just ended, leaving Britain exhausted and broke. The aristocracy was intact, but the middle-class merchants, tradesmen, clerks they'd scraped through decades of war only to find peacetime offered nothing better. Then South America exploded. Spanish colonies were breaking free. Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Chile. New republics were forming, and they needed money. European investors saw gold mines, fertile land, untapped markets. The London Stock Exchange lit up with bonds from these new countries offering 6%. Returns double what safe British government bonds paid. It was a feeding frenzy. And into this chaos walked Gregor MacGregor. He was Scottish, charming, a military man with stories of fighting alongside Simon Bolivar in Venezuela's war for independence. He'd married Bolivar's cousin, risen to the rank of general, even briefly captured Florida from the Spanish in 1817. By the time he arrived in London, MacGregor was calling himself His Serene Highness Gregor I, Sovereign Prince of the state of Poyais and its dependencies, and cacique of the Poyer nation. A prince of a country no one had heard of. But that was about to change. MacGregor's story was simple. In 1820, while in Central America, he'd been granted 8 million acres along the Mosquito Coast present day Honduras by a local indigenous king named George Frederick Augustus I. The king had made him cacique, a hereditary prince, and given him authority to develop the territory. The land was called Poyais, and according to MacGregor, it was paradise. He described a nation with fertile soil, rivers running with gold, forests of mahogany and cedar. The capital, St. Joseph, was a European-style city with paved streets, an opera house, public buildings, a functioning bank. The native Poyers were friendly, hardworking, eager to trade. The climate was temperate, immune to tropical disease. To prove it, MacGregor came prepared. He had documents. A land grant signed by King George Frederick Augustus, complete with seals and signatures. Maps showing Poyais borders. A national flag featuring 2 unicorns. A coat of arms. Even a constitution. He opened the Poyaisian legation to Britain in London, an official embassy. He hired staff. He set up land offices in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Stirling. Then he published a guidebook, Sketch of the Mosquito Shore, including the territory of Poyais, written by one Captain Thomas Strangeways of the 1st Native Poyer Regiment. It was 350 pages of detailed description, soil quality, mineral deposits, climate data, social customs, government structure. The book concluded that Poyais would rapidly advance in prosperity and civilization. There was one problem. Thomas Strangeways didn't exist. MacGregor wrote it himself. But no one knew that. And even if they'd been suspicious, how would they check? News from Central America took months to arrive. The region was politically unstable. Indigenous rulers did grant land to Europeans. Other republics were issuing bonds in London. Nothing about Poyais seemed impossible. MacGregor understood something critical in the slow information age. Documentation created reality. If it looked official, it was official. If it was printed, it was true. If other people believed it, you should too. In October 1822, he issued £200,000 in Poyaisian government bonds on the London Stock Exchange. A respected London bank, Sir John Purring, Shaw, Barber & Co., underwrote the loan. The bonds were offered at 80% of face value with 6% annual interest, the same rate as Colombian and Peruvian bonds. The prospectus was clear. The bonds were secured on all the revenues of the government of Poyais, including land sales, timber exports, and mineral rights. Investors bought in immediately. British newspapers listed Poyaisian bonds right alongside those of legitimate countries. The financial press tracked the price. Society figures attended events hosted by the cacique. London's Lord Mayor held a banquet in his honor. An aristocrat gave him a country estate to use while in England. Gregor MacGregor had done it. He'd legitimized a country that didn't exist. But legitimacy required one more thing: settlers. MacGregor needed people to actually go to Poyais. If the country was real, it needed citizens. If it was being developed, it needed workers. Without settlers, the bond investors would ask questions. So he targeted Scotland. He told his fellow Scots they could buy 100 acres of prime Poyaisian farmland for just £11 less than a month's wages for a skilled tradesman. Wealthy buyers could purchase military commissions, government posts, banking licenses. He sold them Poyaisian currency. Printed banknotes he designed himself. Settlers exchanged real British pounds for fake Poyais dollars at MacGregor's offices, believing they'd need local money when they arrived. Hundreds bought land certificates. Some sold everything they owned. In September 1822, the Honduras packet departed London with 70 settlers aboard. In January 1823, the Kennersley Castle left Scotland with 180 more. These weren't desperate refugees. They were skilled workers, doctors, bankers, civil servants, artisans. One man had been appointed official shoemaker to the Princess of Poyais. Another was the country's designated army officer. Families brought children. They packed tools, seeds, building materials. They believed they were colonizing a functioning nation. The voyage took weeks. When the Honduras packet reached the coordinates MacGregor had provided, the passengers saw jungle. Dense, unbroken, hostile jungle. No harbor. No city. No roads. No people. The crew anchored offshore. The settlers rowed to the beach. What they found was a ruined hut, the remnant of a failed Scottish settlement from decades earlier, and a river mouth choked with vegetation. No farms. No infrastructure. No evidence that any European had lived there in years. Some refused to believe it. They checked the maps again. They searched the coastline. Maybe they'd landed in the wrong spot. But as days passed, the truth set in. There was no Poyais. There never had been. They were stranded. The ships had already left. Supplies were limited. The heat was unbearable. Mosquitoes swarmed. Within weeks, settlers started dying. Malaria, yellow fever, dysentery, starvation. Some tried to build shelters. Others became too weak to move. A few attempted to hunt, but the jungle offered nothing. They drank from the river and got sicker. By the time the second ship arrived in early 1823, the first group was barely surviving. The Kennersley Castle passengers stepped onto the same empty beach, clutching their Poyaisian currency, and realized they'd been lied to. Panic spread. Some settlers blamed MacGregor's publishers. Others blamed the ship captains. A few still defended MacGregor, insisting he'd been deceived by his own staff. But the dying continued.